Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditam Astu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May that one protect us both. May that one nourish us both. May our study be full of vigor and enlightenment. May we not unnecessarily cavil with each other. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. So this is our question answer session. As usual, I'll pause for a while. You can gather some questions together and see if we can answer them.
Sometimes we do have thoughts which, as soon as it occurs, we know it's not the right thought to have, and we kind of say no to it. But then sometimes if it keeps coming or something like that, is there a strong, immediate way to reject it or to arrest or stop or let it go?
Okay, it's a good question. So we have to bear in mind that we are suffering from obstacles in our way. Granted that our nature is full and free and perfect. The discovery or uncovering of it is because of various layers. Yoga philosophy calls these kleshas, obstacles. That means the whole spiritual life is to remove these obstacles. And these obstacles are primarily, of course, in the mind. In fact, they're only in the mind because, as your question suggests, it is that field that we call the mind in which all these varieties of thoughts arise. But they don't just spontaneously arise from nowhere. They're coming from a deep level, the unconscious mind. And the unconscious mind that I call the habit level is comprised of conscious activity that is rehearsed and repeated until it becomes habitual. And the whole of life is a learned variety of this. All biological behavior, all psychological behavior, according to this idea, is caused by a preceding seed. And the seed is driven by this need to exist. So the Darwinian biologists, the evolutionary biologists, are quite correct when they say that we have an urge to survive. But the difference, of course, between that and the yogic way of understanding this evolution is that the one sees nature as an enemy, but the other sees nature as a useful, helpful friend. But what do we mean by nature? Well, nature is comprised of three evolutionary forces. And we know these forces as gunas. And it is by manipulating these gunas that we are able to deal with any mental aberration. The reason why thoughts arise in the mental field is because of clues that arise. And they match up with our memories, and it comes up and surfaces in the conscious mind. And if we don't attend to them, of course, they reinforce the habit that sits below it. And so because this world has a psychological reality, it has to be dealt with in a psychological way. Modern psychology wants to repress things. So the language of stopping, the language of changing, all this language belongs really to modern psychology. But on the other side, they're also saying, please don't repress anything. Repression is also very bad. But the Sankhya psychology, on which all the psychology of the Vedanta is based, will not agree with this because it will see things in this threefold way. So let's examine what these three evolutionary forces are in relation to the human psyche. We have this word sattva. It's a very interesting word. Sat it infers something that is existing without any blemish, something that is truthful, an element that contains this truthful, pristine, uncluttered aspect. What clutters the mind is really selfish interests. Even when we declare that we have some human love, it is really love for ourselves, not love for the other, if you examine it carefully, because it is tainted. So what taints it? Two other elements taint it. One element is a drive toward achieving something, a driving toward individual benefit. It is based on mistake that we are a unit comprised of a body that may live to maybe 100 years, that has limps along, suffering from disease, victim to COVID virus, and all other manner of things. A victim of change. Today, modern biology is so keen to perpetuate this existence in the physical frame and bring us physically and mentally held onto a material plane, that it has identified some elements that are responsible for cellular deterioration. And there is an experiment, or a series of experiments going on today, that will develop this into a serum form. And so those people who are studying this and experimenting with this are extremely confident that we will live physically to 180 years easily. 180 years could be 180 years of foolishness. And foolish means just repeating the old habits unchanged. And yet we are saying, let's not repress anything, let's not stop anything. Let's find a different way of dealing with these things that arise. Making new pathways in the mind. So this is complemented and supplemented by a stage of inertness, a condition where nothing moves, a conditioning where nothing wants to move. In the human psyche, we find it as lethargy, laziness, a kind of fight against the will, something that doesn't want to change. Changing human behavior is extremely difficult because of the habitual nature of the mind. I often say that and give a number of examples. If you're used to living in a house and you change your living quarters and you're driving home from work, the chances are absent-mindedly you'll drive to your own house, your old house being there, and then you realize almost half the way or three-quarters of the way, sometimes even on arrival, oh, this is not my house anymore. But you put on an overdrive. You put the mind into an overdrive condition. You allowed the instinctual mind to behave as it is, and you arrive there somehow automatically. It is to get this automation changed, improved. All beings have a drive toward perfection. The Patanjali Yoga Sutras has 4 chapters in it. And Swami Vivekananda in 1895 dictated this commentary and this wonderful text, Raja Yoga, to Miss S.C. Waldo in Brooklyn, in America. It is said he would paste up and down and dictated the book, and Miss S. Waldo, being a very talented stenographer, captured all of this. He devised this book because people called him Vivekananda and said, why doesn't he show us the Indian road trip and go back home? His response was this: taking into account psychology and taking into account also the science of his day. Part of that science was to do with energy, and part of that science was to do with Darwinian evolution. And the Patanjali Yoga Sutras actually deals with both of these issues. So what we call the mind is a kind of energy. It is a universal prana that is attracted by a stuff which we call chitta. And chitta is described as combinations of vrittis or waves in the mind, which means that, as the questioner suggested, we can easily observe some instinct, some wave coming up as a thought and having its reign a little bit and disappearing like a wave. A wave, we can see where is its origin, we can see where is its peak, we can see where its demise is. The fact of witnessing infers to us that we are not part and parcel of this wave. The fact of observing tells us that we are an independent witness. And therefore, do we have the capacity, given the time, to put in another wave, a chosen wave of our own? And if these three waves come in these three forms of sattva, rajas, and tamas, when we find rajas and tamas, can we not select the sattva? But why should we do it? Is it not just a natural thing to allow these waves to come and go? Can we not just live our lives, adding more and more experience and more habits developed and settled, the old ones entrenched deeper, and new experiences on the top? The problem is, of course, the deeper ones are the ones that are difficult to deal with. They are the most persistent. They are the oldest friends that have accumulated. And our system says not just in this life, accumulated also from a continuation of our drive toward perfection. Now, what is the benefit of controlling this? It is because a discerning mind will know that two of these elements will provide us with pain. And the word guna is used because it means something that binds us, and our urge is toward freedom. These four sections of Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the last one is kaivalya, independence. When you're completely independent, when you're completely disconnected, when you are not dependent on anything, then truly you are free. It is only dependence that makes you bound and imprisoned, as it were. And the result of that will be pain. Because we are relying on something that is only there temporary in terms of time, and it's only there in a certain condition in terms of space, the net effect will be pain to us, because we get what we sow. We reap what we sow. This game of sowing and reaping, we call this karma. A cause and effect. Because you see, if I have a hankering for something and it comes and goes quickly, the hankering doesn't go away. And the hankering then becomes a disturbance to me, and it requires a repetition. The most obvious and exaggerated form of this behavior is called addiction. People get addicted to a substance, let's say alcoholic drink. How can they get rid of this? Is it by determining not to have something, or is it by replacing it with something much better? Let us suppose that somebody is struggling with this problem. Let us suppose that they joined a program, let's say the Alcoholics Anonymous. Let us say that, with all good intention, a 12-step program was laid out. What makes it difficult is because a thought can be mobilized that starts off from a negative, not a positive. So just as a suggestion, I don't want to be too controversial, when you stand up in front of a group and you say, my name is so-and-so, I am an alcoholic. This is not satya, this is not the truth. And therefore, this is not a sattvic thought. Because the truth is that you are full and free and perfect, according to Vedanta Yoga. Your nature is absolutely of a nature of illumination. Your nature is that which lights all the rest. All the rest means that field that we call the intellect, the field that we call the mind in which waves arise, and ultimately the physical field that is an expression of our activity. It becomes instrumental in accommodating and enacting our will. It is the purified will that needs to be refined. But that also comes as a wave, something that comes and something that goes and something that can be observed. So when a negative thought arrives in the mind, you had done well if you had said, I don't want this thought. But repression won't do it. And so the technique, that is the yogic technique that's been passed on for all schools of thought, really, as a technique. Let us bear in mind the Sankhya psychology is, and the Sankhya cosmology also, is accepted by every school. Every school of philosophy, every approach will take these fundamental building blocks. Bhagavad Gita says that and the Shankaracharya says in his commentary, that in regard to the science of these three rudimentary elements, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, or gunas, then the Sankhyas are the experts at this. We have no disagreement with it. Our disagreement will only be based on, of course, the Vedanta Sutras, that the Sankhyas' final conclusions, that their emphasis on pradhana or prakriti as a fundamental causal element, and the yogis also following it to a great extent. This is being hammered left and right. And so the final conclusion is something that is different. But in terms of the fundamental building blocks of the relative world, we fully agree. In terms of the psychology, we fully agree. And in terms of the methodology, we also fully agree. What is that methodology? We can call that loosely yoga. So it is this yoga we have to practice in order to control his thoughts. Swami Vivekananda beautifully puts it, and his great summary comment heads up the introduction of his book Raja Yoga, that each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this from within, controlling nature, internal, external. Internal means the mind. And then he goes on about the methodology of it, fourfold methodology, which he calls the four yogas. Not his invention. He's simply elaborating and bringing up to date the philosophy that we find very clearly expounded in the Srimad Bhagavad Gita. I've come to fulfill, not to destroy, said Jesus. And every prophet, every incarnation will do the same thing. You build on the top of the other one. And ultimately, build on the top to make it entirely universal. No segments of sectarianism within it. Some fundamental universal method and principle has to be there, that every single person, that every single generation can adopt universally. And once we understand that, we have no basis to fight. So how to deal with this? Understanding that these waves come within a field that we call a mind, and able to observe it, we have to first of all give credence to its origin as a first step. We won't repress anything. We won't squash anything. All we'll do is see if we can make a sublimation. See if we can do something useful, given the fact that we have a gift of time. Time is very significant, because time comes in units. And in each unit, a wave is possible. In one wave, some thought comes that we don't want. The reasoning behind we don't want it is not because it is evil or bad or immoral or anything like that, but viewed from the yogic point of view, it is painful. It is not in our favor. It is not ultimately useful to us. But the ignorance component drives us to think that it is useful. And so we have to assert a level of discernment. To start with, we have to be convinced of what is useful to be done, and of what is of lasting value, and what is of temporal value. On this basis, we can assess this frame of mind and let it linger for a few seconds while we now muster the forces of the next subsequent seconds and put something more useful in and play a game like this. Now I repeat over and over again what this game looks like. Something like a game of tennis. Something like a game in the mind also that is able, in a sporting way, to see what's happening, to observe it nicely, and with a sporting attitude so that it doesn't become negative. We then say, the Lord has given me a succession of opportunities. Although we may say that time is something like an illusion, from the human point of view, there's no other way to evaluate comings and goings. Straight away, we understand that there is a continuum, a past, a present, and a future. And all of them at some point have been or will be the present. In this present moment, what useful investment can we put? What better thought can we place? And then can we sustain it for another second? And will it then form a useful habit such that it will outweigh all the other habits contained in the unconscious mind? Can we play a game like that builds up a new experience in the mind, something that is refreshing, that somehow dilutes and then outweighs completely all the old habits? Is there a method like this? So all the methods will agree by cleaning the mind, promoting the sattva element, the others get neutralized. It is a subtle way of dealing with it. It is not a direct attack on an enemy. It is simply making friends with new values. And so my example is always something like 20 seconds given. Make the Lord your scorekeeper, just to repeat many things I repeated before. And then, with a fun attitude, ask the Lord, please, will you sit in the judgment chair? Will you now be a scorekeeper for me? Will you now keep the cricket score? How many innings was there? How many bowlings? How many battings? Whether people were in, whether they were out? Please keep the score for me. Thank you. Now the Lord is in charge of scorekeeping, but also as a provider of the seconds that come to me. And I ask to start with, while brushing my teeth, how many thoughts came and where were they occupied, given that I'm only dealing with a frame of 20 seconds. And the Lord says -4. 4 negative thoughts came, but they came and went. At the last moment, in between, that is, before another wave arises, you ask me, what is the score? What did these 4 comprise? All the things that came up from the habit level that are going to produce pain for me, 4 negatives coming. -4. Lord, thank you, because I know that another 16 seconds are coming along. And in those 16 seconds, what would I do? Instead of saying, what a pity, let me put what a glory, what a glory, what a glory. Let me put values of strength and beauty and goodness and love and harmony and peace, generosity. Let me put truth in there. Let there be peace. Let all be peaceful. Let all be blissful. All these qualities, let me try to sit where you sit on your universal throne, where you reign there, and let me try to dispense as you dispense. All these values like flowers going out. Strong, true, wise, full, free, truth, beauty, goodness, love, harmony, all that. 16 seconds passed. Lord, how's the score? I told you about the -4. Yes, -4. But 16 pluses. Ah, wonderful. Over 20 seconds gives me a net worth of 12. Plus 12, I can put it in my permanent fixed deposit account, the unconscious mind. And the more I do that, the more of the positive investments go along until instead of being in the red, I'm now in a healthy position. Most people's bank account is something like in the brown. There's some good things, some maybe not so good things. Let me completely make a whole revolution, a whole cleansing of the mind at the unconscious level. I can't change the unconscious at the unconscious level. I can only change it by a new investment at the conscious level. Let me put these thoughts in. Let me follow what my teacher said. Let me practice regularly japa, God's name, love of God. All these things let me put in. Let me do a little sandhya and put in feeling with it, put in the emotion with it, put in the intention with it. But don't repress anything. When an old friend comes up, an old friend, a thought that was there in my childhood. Let's just take, for example, anger. Anger comes in my childhood because somebody stole a toy. That anger sits within me as part of an infant script, a child script and a childishness in there. I can't get rid of it because it's there, it's part and parcel of my psychological history. Let me bring it up. As it comes up, let me recognize it. I recognize you. We first met when I was 3 years old. And we became firm friends when I was 5. But then something else happened. Ultimately, I went to school. Occasionally, you came up and visited me. Come if you like, sit down, have a cup of tea, and then go off. Because as soon as you're gone, as soon as the door is closed, a new door gets opened. I have new friends and companions. I'm sorry you can't stay so long. Come if you like, stay if you can, go if you must. New friends can come along. Strength and beauty and goodness and wisdom and harmony can come in. Like that, you fill the mind, saturate it on the conscious level. And in doing that, that gradually forms an unconscious habit. Reforming and changing through a cleansing attitude, the unconscious area, then becomes my immediate spontaneous habit. Then people say, what a great saint, what a great person, what a nice person, what a generous person. Even then, if you are reactive to that praise, that is a negative against you also, because all of this comes for sustaining the ego. What is the ego? It is mixing the seer up with what is seen. It is taking for permanent what is impermanent. It is taking seriously that this earth car that you operate and move is you. That this mind, which is a field of experience, is you. That this personality or mask is you, not the one behind the mask. And a discerning attitude is necessary. And this is where philosophy is studied. This to convince us that selfishness is not a good investment because, let us give an example. An example I have given so many times before, but it's a little funny. Supposing I am a deer in the forest, and supposing I am a little unaware, deliberately unaware, completely occupied with grazing in a field. then that will not be to my benefit, because there'll be an alert and awake lion. There's a saying in Africa, when the sun rises, animals should start running. And if the deer does not run and the lion runs, it's the deer's misfortune. Two things are running in the early morning on the African plains. One is a deer and one is a lion. And when the lion is running, if you're a deer, you best be running too. So if we don't operate correctly, if we give up, if we don't act, if we're not energetic in any way, then we will be caught, and this is painful. We'll be the breakfast served nicely for the lion in the morning. Then supposing there's a great stadium filled with people enthusiastic about a sport, and I come late, and then in the midst of this, I have a desperation to see what's going on. I want to see what is the score. But these big fellows are all in front of me, all 6 to 7 foot tall. Me being a little bit modest in height, but with urgency to go and see the game, I start elbowing left and right. Before anybody knows what's happened, my quickness would put me in the front. I have a beautiful view. So this is the nature of rajas. That is, I want to do something, but when I look at it properly, it's not for the benefit of others, it's for my own benefit. It's to sustain my status quo. For my own happiness, I'm acting. But the effect will be like this. Sooner or later, all those who receive the blows, who are much bigger and stronger than me, will turn around and question each other, what happened, what happened? And this fellow in the front, he's the cause of the nuisance, and 1,000 blows will come onto me. So this is the nature of rajas. But sattva is very different. A sattva is akin to walking toward the sun. That is creating a positivity that automatically neutralizes the other waves. And so the technique is, in order to neutralize the rajas and tamas, we have to promote the sattva, having a neutralizing effect. The yogic concepts go like this. Since the mind is like a wave disturbed, or like an ocean or a lake disturbed by so many different waves, 3 kinds of waves being there, sattva, rajas, and tamas. By promoting the sattva, I neutralize the rajas and tamas and create a clarity of vision where I'm able to see clearly, with truthfulness, with purity, what is at the very bottom, the very heart, the blissful base of who I am. And there we find no necessity for any thought. There is only a witness, a thinker, a knower, standing there. And it is that which is my own true nature. I don't have to combat my nature. My nature is that. If my nature wasn't that, I couldn't change it, or I couldn't do anything with it. If my nature is, in other words, if my nature is fleeting, if my nature is superficial, if my nature is the waves, waves cannot change waves. Only some independent entity can do it. So playing this game of life, playing this game of psychological equanimity, playing this game of joy, playing it with a sense of fun, playing it with a sporting attitude is the way. Now, in other talks, I had described it as 4 R's, and you may be reminded of that, so I'll go through that. First of all, something comes up in the mental field. We have no control over it because it comes from the habit level that has been learned by us, for better or worse. So the first thing we do is react, and that reaction, we can't stop it. The reaction can be purely psychological, or it can translate to impulsive action also. In any event, the fact is we saw it. If we never saw it, if it just passed us and we took it for granted, and not only that, but sought some justification for it. You find these phrases, justified anger. There's no justified anger. How can this be? All anger is a wave of rajas. And rajas will cause you pain. So one psychologist will say, it's all right, let the anger out. They don't know these principles. Go and dig a hole somewhere, punch a pillow, get it all out. It's better to get it out than keep it in. Admittedly, we can't repress such a thing. We can't, but letting it out is damaging. Transforming it is what you want to do, because it is simply energy. And that energy has to be transformed into something more useful. Why shouldn't it be transformed into goodness and love? Why not take that raw material, understand its energetic component and how powerful it is, and much more powerful? Can we not transform it into something which is along the lines of strength and goodness and harmony? So transforming this discordant thought, this is the psychology we should employ, and this is the psychology of yoga. So our reaction, that becomes the first R. Then if we like, we can stand back a little bit and inquire, where did this come from? We can review it. What happened? Something happened and it was not within my control, or I didn't control it. All right, that's fine. It came, it went. Because it went, I can't bring it back and say, hey, come on, let's have a look at this. But I can bring back a memory of the events and find out where is it coming from. This is called review. But then I have to revalue. Revaluation has to be there to say that this is an old friend. This friend may have had its use. When I cried when I was 5 years old, others came running. There was a value to it. There was a use for it. I was expressing how I felt. And I was feeling principally a number of childish emotions. But now that I'm an adult, the usefulness of this has gone. Now that I want to experience a separation from this identity, this psychophysical identity, some other technique has to be used. I can't rely on those old friends. They're not useful to me anymore. In my youth, there was a boy, he was a next door neighbor, and he was friends, but then in the schoolyard, he became a bully. And then somehow in the home environment, he was a friend again. So a friend who actually is against me, how will I tolerate that? I have to change it. So this transformation is there, called spiritual life, investing in it, using the advantage of time. What a wonderful framework. The Lord coming as time, as Kala coming as time, giving me an opportunity to sit back and play a different game. So I can revalue all of this and re-register all these things. Part of the re-registration should surely be, I don't want to associate with this body. I don't want to associate with these habits. I am separate from it. Or you can say it in a different way. I am the Lord's child. I am the mother's child, mother of the whole universe. I am her child. And so let me surrender to her. Mother, let me stand aside while your grace flows through. You who shifts all the universe and galaxies, you who makes the expansion, you who creates all the supernova, you who spins all the earths and planets, you who transforms energy in the form of hydrogen to helium and creates a radiation and warmth and energy. Can you not do some small thing for me? Of course. So in these ways, with these revised thoughts from your revaluation, you now start forming a new habit. And those new habits start outweighing the old ones to the extent that the habit that you formed from this process becomes your first spontaneous reaction. It becomes easy, it becomes natural. No fight necessary, no combat zone. All doing it with a sense of faith and a sense of fun. Well, faith is an important aspect. There's a story from the Christian Gospels, Matthew it is, and Sri Ramakrishna also refers to this. And I happen to know it's going to probably appear this evening when Swami Vimokshananda talks about Gospel of Ramakrishna. A story of Jesus, Sri Ramakrishna refers to this. See, all the disciples have gone out on the water. The Lord has remained in prayer. And the Lord now calls to them. And he starts coming, but he's walking on the water. And such an unusual phenomena makes them frightened. And he's making an assurance, I am the Lord, I am your rabbi, I am your master. And they say, you look like a ghost. We have a great fear. No, come. And then Peter gets out and starts walking. But as soon as his faith fails him, he sinks. And the Lord rescues him. Doubt, absence of faith, negativity, self-doubt in your own worth. This is the difficulty. And that's why Vivekananda says, actually, it starts with faith in yourself. But what does it mean? It means faith in yourself as I am Atman. And then the expression of that Atman, the instrumentation of it, I have faith in all the skills and talents and abilities which are there to play this game of life and also make this inner discovery in so doing. So this faith is necessary. The capacity to think independently is there. And look at all the resources given. The thankfulness. Yesterday we were celebrating Swami Shivananda's Titi Puja, his birthday, his birth, and his life and his teachings also. And you may have picked up from yesterday's talk how closely concerned I am with his life, because my sannyas guru was his disciple, and I had the privilege to serve him for many, many, many years. And in doing that, I understood his skill, his way of thinking, and understood it to be a reflection of his guru's thinking. And his guru's thinking was a reflection of his guru's thinking. And there we stop, because there's nothing that can surpass the guru that we call Sri Ramakrishna. So what a good fortune it is. I think, am I deserving of this? Evidently so. How I was born in a certain environment where there was an emphasis on religion and religious values. How I was in the environment of, in a monastic environment from a very early age. How circumstances maneuvered themselves divinely so that you would meet a great, great holy person who led me to another holy person, who led me to my Diksha Guru, who led me into a tradition so fortunate, so profound. So Shankaracharya tells us in his Viveka Shudamani that you are fortunate if you are born as a human being. And you are fortunate if you had the various circumstances that made an advantage for you in life. And you are fortunate that you are born as somebody who had an interest in spirituality, when we know from 7th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that of all those beings around, only a few may be interested, and of those who are interested, only a few will make some profound discovery. And all this through profound grace that is flowing and ever available to everybody but only a few taken advantage of. It's like having a sale, you see, something called Black Friday. They have a big sale, and only a few may get in early and may have the competitive edge about it and may take advantage of it. So it's a kind of similar example. Only a few will take advantage of a free thing that is pouring, that is flowing. It's called divine grace. And how fortunate I am to be sitting here amongst all of you. And why should I feel fortunate by sitting here? Is because I'm thinking of God. The very question stimulated ideas in my own mental field that made me very happy because I'm talking of God. What greater joy can I have? I'm talking about the grace that flows in us and through us and within us, beyond us, and how we can be companions in this, and how we can share all the experience that we all share in common. That is, thoughts arising in the mind. And the difficulty that people have in understanding how will we deal with it, and then learning the technique, applying our skills and talents. All of us have the skill and talent to play this sporting art of a psychological game, because all of us have thoughts that flow, and they're flowing from a habit level, and they're flowing in reaction to a circumstance that we can either decide to take as permanent and real, or to take as a game of waves. And all of this is taking us back, because when we now cultivate these sattvic waves, it doesn't end there. Not only are we reforming our habit level, but we are also reforming our environment for ourselves and others. Because all these waves ultimately are waves of existence. And although we've categorized them threefold, the subtlemost components are subtle waves, mere elements, tanmatras, God's graces, God's angels going ahead of us to make the crooked path straight. And all of this comes from the cosmic mind, only one mind. Don't think you have your own independent mind. This universal mind that we call a personal God sits there. And that gets resolved back. That personal cosmic ego gets resolved back to a state of potentiality, with this prana, this energy that comes out as thought, is barely trembling, hardly moving, but available for a cycle to emerge by this becoming more and more, mobilizing the potential matter that we have that is called akasha, and then creating all of this dark, undefined ocean of waters. And from where does it arise, you see? So the Vedanta philosophy then takes over and says where it arises is because there is an entity. This entity serves as both the efficient and the material cause. We don't have to look beyond that. And when the mind is clarified, it's what we discover. All right, so it's 10 minutes now to 12. I'll finish off this particular theme, because this whole question of creation was brought up a little earlier in the thoughts issued. So there is an Upanishad called Aitariya Upanishad. The Aitariya Upanishad starts off with the idea of creation of not the world, but creation of a cosmic person that we call the world. So it starts off, Atma va idam iha eva graha asita. The self truly was all this. And when we say all this, we have to say, with a wave of the hand, all things that are condensed into matter, and all this which is a force, one energy. Force is actually just the effect of this energy, this mobilizing potential. one only in the beginning. Now, the beginning is a controversial phrase or a controversial word because beginning is a time-bound word. And time, when we say this, it means that prior to this, it didn't exist. There was no time, no space. Modern science traces everything back to something like a Big Bang. But prior to this Big Bang is a singularity, is a speculation. Modern cosmology has this concept. And then you ask, what was it? We don't know. Was it time? No. Time came from it. Space came from it. And an explosion came from it. And all the rest came from it. And you and I here discussing it came from it. Now, this is a beautiful, maybe erroneous concept, but nonetheless, the concept of it is that there was a point undefined where you cannot say there was any time or any space, but then a beginning. Something happened. Nothing else whatsoever winked. Those who recall, maybe some months ago now, I brought out a poem which used this term wink. When you look into the sky, you'll see stars winking back at you. This eye winks in wonderment and amazement, and a star winks back at you. A beautiful poetic concept. Nothing else whatsoever winked. Nothing blinked, nothing winked, nothing flashed. And then that one thought, see, the whole mobilizing force of the universe is a thought that moves forward. And from that thought comes everything else, including your own so-called localized thought. Let me now create the worlds. We're putting it in this way. Everything is derived from this entity. And there's no second apart from this entity. And when we say nothing else winked whatsoever, it's a kind of way of refuting this Sankhya dualism from which we've derived this psychological base. Because the non-being of matter, which is assumed for explaining creation, is not external to this supreme. There's no duality in it. So then, after that, of course, various worlds that are described as a kind of wavy thing, or a kind of emanating thing like light, or a radiant thing such as radiation, and a birth of something and a death of something. And all of these waves are there, including waves in the mind, coming from this one entity of prana. I'm just tempted to say a little bit about this energy, this prana. And here I am referring to Swami Vivekananda's comments on this Patanjali Yoga Sutras. It has 4 sections to it, ending ultimately, as mentioned before, in this one section of Kaivalya, isolation or freedom, that being our aim, and concentration being the movement toward it. And so this discussion is around a certain stanza. By throwing out and restraining the breath is all that's described. And he says that the word used, prana is not exactly breath. It is the name, he says, of the energy that is in the universe. Whatever you see in the universe, whatever moves, he says, or works or has life, is a manifestation of this prana. The sum total of energy displayed in the universe, that's called prana. And this prana, before a cycle begins, what we described here in the Aitareya Upanishad, remains in an almost motionless state, almost motionless. subtly being there, but hardly perceptible. And when the cycle begins, the prana begins to manifest itself. And it is this prana that is manifest as motion. What kinds of motion? Well, in us, motion in the nervous system, in ourselves, in human beings or animals. And this same prana is manifesting as thought. So the question is around prana, manifesting as thought. And so how to control prana, pranayama? Of course, to steady this nervous system, we can develop a certain system that is evidence of life or prana within us that is responsible for the movement of the lungs. When there's no movement within the lungs, then we call the undertaker. Come on, this person now is dead. Oh, in the movement in the lungs there, we see everything is working, everything is beating, breath is there. The last breath, of course, we say, this person now, we give a death certificate. The whole universe is a combination of this subtle energy and this moving thing and this basic potential material that we call akasha. So is the human body. Out of akasha, you get the different materials that you feel and see, and out of prana, all the various forces. Now, this throwing out and restraining the prana is in fact what is called pranayama. And I should note, in answer to some other questions that have been asked during the week. So I'll highlight this aspect and then we can leave it. Patanjali, the father of yoga philosophy, does not give very many particular directions about pranayama. But later on, other yogis found out various things about this and made of it a great science. With Patanjali, it is one of the many ways, but he doesn't lay much stress on it. He just says, presenting this in a scientific way, I have to show you all the material I have, and this is a way. He means that you simply throw the air out and draw it in and hold it in for some time. That's all. And by that, the mind will become a little calmer. Now, I bring this up because in dealing with this question of thoughts, which we want to deal with and which we want to supplement in the mind, we first have to this process of reacting and reviewing and revaluing and then reforming. It takes an amount of time. And there's a proverbial kind of statement that is often used when somebody gets upset, oh, go away, step outside the door and count to 10. Another way of saying, please reestablish your equilibrium and harmony. Get all the emotion and steady it. In an emotional state, you won't be able to think very rationally. But when you have time to calm down, then things will look better. You'll be able to deal with them in a more efficient and sensible way. And so, calming the nerves by this process of revaluing, this process of reviewing, revaluing, and then reforming. This is the systematic process that we should use, and we should always try to neutralize the waves of rajas and tamas that are disturbing to us with sattva, and then the sattva itself, having had its use and reformed the habit level, itself can be dispensed with, thereby transcending all three gunas. Trigunatita, the state of transcendence of the gunas, of these evolutionary forces. So now at 12 o'clock, which means we'll leave it there. You can attend then to your stomachs and have some lunch and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. And just to comment, this subject really is dealt with comprehensively and practically in the process that we call Enneagram and Essence of Truth. And I think most of you, if not all of you, have been engaged in this process, have managed to go through the process. But there is room for this course because next weekend we start on a process. So far, we only have 40 participants. I'm not that unhappy with less participants since we'll probably be doing the whole thing on Zoom. But we have room for double that number, actually. So if you know of anybody who would, of course, everybody will benefit from this, but I would phrase it like this: anybody who is ready for this process, then they need to register. So you can mention this to friends and what have you. We leave it there. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.